This Migration Policy Institute webinar, K-12 Instructional Models for English Learners, What They Are and Why They Matter, is moderated by the Director for MPI's National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy, Margie McHugh.
You'll be hearing first from Julie Sugarman, who's the author of the piece of work that we're releasing today. And then we are thrilled that we've got terrific experts, Silvia Romero-Johnson from the Madison, Wisconsin Metropolitan School District, who I'll introduce more fully as we get into the webinar. And also I'll give a more proper introduction to Lisette Colon-Collins from the New York State Department of Education, where she's an Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Bilingual Ed. We're just so pleased that both of them are able to join us, so that we'll really be able to get a much deeper look into why certain districts and states have adopted the particular program models that they have. It'll make what Julie's written about, bring it down to both the state policy and the local level. So for now, I'll just say a word or two about the overall context for today's release. First of all, I won't say much about our work. I think most of you who've joined us for the webinar know that we focus a lot on the education pipeline here, trying to promote policies that support immigrants and their children in being able to fully integrate into the U.S., both the economy and really experience lifelong integration success. In our K-12 work, what we've started to do is a series of EL Insights, we're calling them, English Learner Insights. We published one a few weeks ago that Julie authored, looking at data that's available for English learners and how to think about what different data you might be able to find is able to tell you how reliable it is, what its shelf life is, those sorts of things. And then this report that we're releasing today has bubbled up as an important issue, because as we work with a number of state and local partners, the question of whether their school districts are providing quality education to English learners just really seem to require deeper background in the different instructional models that school districts might want to use, which can, of course, depend on what sort of funding and workforce skills and the like their teachers have. And then we know that many folks find themselves sort of pondering the chicken and the egg question, you know, well, if my district could be doing something better, you know, what needs to happen in order to build staff capacity for it? It's sort of a back and forth process for districts figuring out, districts and states, as you'll hear from Lisette, figuring out how to push forward what's the best type of instructional design for their English learner students. So this piece that Julie's authored, that she'll talk about in a moment, really tries to give folks the background that they need in order to be sort of analyzing, doing initial analysis of what they're seeing in terms of the instruction that's provided to ELs in the school districts that or schools they care about. So without further ado, I'll introduce Dr. Julie Sugarman. She's a Senior Policy Analyst for Pre-K-12 Education here at our center, and before coming to the center, she had already developed a national reputation as an expert in educational programs for English learners, particularly dual language and two-way immersion programs. And since she's come here to MPI, she's been a pretty prolific author with both helping us put together helpful data sheets, things like these EL Policy Insights, as well as longer form work, trying to really help folks, regardless of where they sit, what kind of stakeholder they are in these issues, trying to give them a door in to understanding what quality policy funding and educational services look like. So Julie, over to you to get us going.
Great, thank you so much, Margie, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'd like to start by describing three basic types of EL instructional program: dual language, transitional bilingual education, and English only. It's important to know that all three approaches aim for English learners to become fluent in English. The fundamental difference between them is in the goals for developing a partner language and how much that language is used relative to English. Dual language programs use a partner language like Spanish or Chinese for at least half of instruction for at least 5 years. These programs generally start in pre-K or kindergarten and go to at least 5th grade, although many programs extend through middle and high school. Some dual language programs enroll only English learners, some enroll only native English speakers learning a foreign language, and some enroll a balanced number of the two groups. Transitional bilingual programs enroll English learners that all speak a common home language. Teachers provide instruction in the home language for much of the day early in the program, but the goal is to transition to English fairly quickly. In elementary school, students in dual language and transitional bilingual programs are usually in that program all day, but in secondary school, students often spend part of their day in general education classes. There's a lot more to say about the dual language and transitional bilingual models, but I want to focus today a little bit more on the English-only programs. As you can see from this list, there's a lot of program models that fall under the umbrella of English-only approaches. The ones that most people are familiar with are the first two. In pull-out programs, a specialist teacher pulls students out of their general education classes to work in small groups on tasks that are specially designed for English learners. This model is a little more common in elementary school, whereas you're more likely to see a classroom ESL model in middle or high school. In this model, students would have 1 or 2 class periods assigned to ESL, and the other class periods are for other subjects like math and science. We're going to come back to the other models listed here in a minute, but first I want to say something about the limits of relying on the names of program models to tell you how students are being served. One of the reasons we need to be cautious about relying on the labels that schools give their EL programs is that the terms we've just talked about are used inconsistently. In some cases, it may be because schools are not implementing a program the way they ought to, but in many cases, the variation is because the models can and should be adapted to a local situation. So even if a school is using a familiar label like dual language, sometimes you have to dig a little deeper to find out exactly what they mean by that. One of the reasons that I wanted to write the brief that we're releasing today was that for English-only programs, I found that for schools to just list which model or models they use is not really sufficient to understand how an English learner experiences instruction throughout the day or over several years. As the field of English learner teaching has evolved, we've realized that students need to be supported beyond basic English skills so that they can be successful in their academic classes. Because of this, schools are increasingly helping teachers to understand that EL support needs to happen in content areas, not just when students are in a class that's designated as ESL. English learner specialists are now working with general education teachers as coaches or to plan specific lessons or activities to be sure they're appropriate for English learners. This broadened view of EL support means that students often experience a combination of models. This chart shows a different way of thinking about English-only program models than how they're usually presented as a list of labels with definitions. This chart has kind of a lot going on in it, and each of the components is described in detail in the brief. So I'd like to use this time to just give you some examples of how this looks from the student point of view. The first example is Anna, who's a first-grade English learner at a pretty low level of English proficiency. As in most elementary schools, Anna's assigned to a homeroom that has a mix of English learners and non-English learners, and these kids generally work together all day. Anna gets pulled out of her classroom for an hour every day to work with an ESL teacher, and her ESL teacher also pushes into her classroom for 30 minutes twice a week during English language arts to help Anna and her EL peers with class activities. The rest of the time, Anna's working alongside other English learners and non-English learners in her classroom, but her classroom teacher has had training in what we call sheltered instruction. So Anna's getting supported in math, science, and social studies in ways that blend right into regular instruction. So you can see that Anna's really getting support all day and through 3 different models: pull out, push in, and sheltered instruction. Now let's look at a high school student who's brand new to the country. Eddie went to school in his home country, but he has some gaps in his academic skills. Eddie enrolls in a high school that has a newcomer program, so his first year he spends almost all of his time in a self-contained setting with other English learners with similar skill levels. In that program, he gets ESL 1, the fundamentals of math, freshman English in a sheltered instruction class, newcomer social studies and science, and art, music, and physical education along with all the other kids in the school. The next year, Eddie takes ESL2 and sheltered English language arts in classes just for English learners, but he gets math, science, and social studies in mixed EL and non-EL classes that are taught by general education teachers who have sheltered instruction training. He even has time to add an elective business class taught in general education. So those two kids are in pretty good situations as far as having a mix of specialist instruction and instruction in general education that supports their learning. The last example is Esther. She's been in the U.S. 2 years, so her English is getting better, but she still struggles to read and write as well as her peers. She ends up in a middle school that doesn't really know what to do with English learners. She's put into a 6th grade English language arts class that happens to be taught by a general education teacher with ESL certification, and so he's able to help Esther, and so we might be generous and call that sheltered English language arts, even though that's not the official name of the class, but there is a teacher who can shelter instruction so that Esther can get extra help and can understand the instruction. She also takes a remedial math class, but it's designed for native English speakers who are behind in math, so she doesn't necessarily get a lot of language support there. And for everything else, she's in general education with teachers who are not trained in sheltered instruction. General education is not really considered an English learner model, but it's a context that ELs frequently experience. Finally, I just want to say a few words about why schools and districts choose different approaches. Ideally, schools are tailoring their instructional approach to the characteristics and needs of their students. Sometimes teacher capacity is a factor, so a school might have to make decisions based on how many ESL teachers they're allotted by the district, or there might not be enough teachers with particular qualifications to implement a model how they'd ideally like to. State policies also play a role because some states have rules about offering or not offering bilingual education or how much of a service students are entitled to. And Lizette's going to give us an example of what that looks like in a few minutes. We'd also expect that research findings would influence what models are used, but that's sometimes affected by the next item on the list, which is decision-maker attitudes and goals. For example, despite the reams of evidence we have that dual language programs are effective for English learners' development of English skills and academic achievement, some educators believe that it's not appropriate to teach in any language other than English. And of course, there's cases where there's simply poor decision-making. So as you can see, there's a complex web of factors that goes into making decisions about the design of EL program models, and the models are just one aspect of what makes for quality services for English learners. I couldn't obviously get into all the details that are in the brief, but I hope that my comments today give you a sense of the components of EL programs in your communities.
Great, thanks, Julie. So now I would like to introduce Silvia Romero-Johnson, who's the Executive Director of the Office of Multilingual and Global Education for the Madison, Wisconsin Metropolitan School District. As you can see from her bio that's up there on the screen, she has spent most of her career there with the Madison School District, and quite interesting for the evolution, I guess, of her engagement there is the fact that she was the principal at the only whole school dual language immersion program in the district before moving up into this position that gives her more of a purview across the district. So you all know why we've asked her to join, because she is the person who is helping schools figure out in that district how to actually design and staff and more generally implement instructional programs that will support English learners where a lot of these different contexts that Julie's outlined are relevant. So we're just delighted to have someone with her background and who's got her sleeves rolled up every day trying to figure out how to push forward good instructional practice to speak about what it looks like in her district and her role in making that happen. So Silvia, welcome, and over to you now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and good morning to everyone who's listening. I am thrilled to be here. Just to give you an overview of our district, you need to know that we have about 27,000 students in approximately 50 different schools. And as Julie had mentioned, our context leads us to have to adopt certain decisions. So English language learners in our district are enrolled in all of our schools. So every single school is a school that will serve English language learners. We serve English language learners, bilingual learners. As you will see in our dual language programs, we have English language learners and non-English language learners enrolled in some of our programs. And then we also lead the district in terms of world language programming. Just to give you an idea who we serve again, our language distribution, the vast majority of our English language learners speak Spanish at home, and then we have a variety of other top languages, such as Hmong, Arabic, Mandinka, Nepali, and all of these enrollment continues to grow. So we serve our English language learners through three different programs. We consider them three separate programs, but certainly they have common goals. Certainly academic achievement, we want to make sure that students are enrolled from the beginning at grade level and they receive grade level instruction, as well as being able to improve their language proficiency concurrently. We want to make sure, as with all of our students in the district, that they develop intercultural skills and knowledge and global awareness, and we want to provide support in home languages, in and for home languages. So going to our first model, our English as a second language model, I really appreciated the chart that Julie shared because it does show the complexity of the work that we do. We provide this service within the general education environment, and we provide staffing to schools. We call our teachers ESL teachers, English as a second language teachers, or bilingual resource teachers, BRTs, that have a shared responsibility along with a classroom teacher to make sure that students are developing all of those three goals that were mentioned earlier. It may look slightly different at the elementary and the middle and high school levels. Particularly at the high school levels, we have a greater variety of models within our ESL services because we do offer some sheltered environments where our dually certified teachers that hold content area licenses as well as ESL licenses are providing grade level courses that allow students to still receive the credits that they need for to fulfill their graduation requirements. And then we have a story to tell to all of our colleagues that in the district we have moved away from transitional bilingual education programs into dual language models. And one of the sub-programs within that is a developmental bilingual education model, where all of the students are English language learners of the same home language background. And in our case, we offer developmental bilingual programs in Spanish and Hmong. And we provide access to grade level, content area, knowledge, and language skills. Our model is a 50-50 model, meaning that 50% of the instruction is in one language and 50% of the instruction is in the other language. And then our dual language immersion program brings together students who are native language speakers in a target language, so in Spanish, as well as students whose home language is English, and the instructional occurs in both languages from the beginning. We do have in our district two different models of dual language immersion, the 90-10 model, in which 90% of the instruction is in the target partner language, in our case Spanish, and then English gets introduced in that grade level and increases in intensity until it becomes 50-50 and through middle school. We also have a high school continuation program to make sure that we're providing instruction at the target level that students can continue improving their proficiency from. And then we have also been working with a 50-50 model for dual language immersion. Due to the shortage of bilingual teachers in our district, we have had to adjust our 90-10 model in most of our schools, and now students are able to still learn in 2 languages, still learn, develop biliteracy skills, but in a 50-50 model. And then, just so that you know, we do have an ELL plan that was approved in the year 2016 that if you have a desire to learn more, you can find in our website, and it specifies what are the areas that are priorities for us to continue to make improvements on behalf of our students. And of course, I also wanted to let you know and make you aware that as a district, we do take the support of immigrant, refugee, and undocumented students and families very seriously. You can also find the resources that we have put together to bring and build the capacity of all of our staff to be sure that our students are having the learning experiences that lead to be able to attain the goals that we have set for them.
Great. Thank you so much, Silvia. And folks, please, you can be sending in questions now for the speakers, so please feel free to use the chat function or the email address I gave earlier, or even via Twitter. So now it's a great pleasure to introduce Lisette Colon-Collins, who is the Assistant Commissioner for Bilingual Education and World Languages with the New York State Education Department. And it is a big job, as you can see there in her bio. The state ed office is providing guidance to over 625 districts, charter schools, and overall 300,000 English learner students being served in the state. And maybe I could venture to say that coming up through the New York City public schools and working there at the Department of Education in a variety of senior leadership positions, but very much focused on English learners and their families, was no doubt some pretty good preparation for them working at the state level. So Lisette, it's great to have you with us, and there's so much that's been happening to push these issues forward in New York State. That first of all, congratulations on all that work and your involvement in it, but also really delighted that you're here to share some of that with us. So over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share the work that we're doing here in New York on behalf of multilingual learners, as we call them, because we understand that it's not just about learning English. And I just want to say, in New York, we have also bilingual programs, dual language programs, and transitional bilingual programs, because we know that in New York, bilingual, it's right? And we also have ENL programs. I wanted to set the stage around what our mission in New York State is, and basically is to ensure that all multilingual learners attain the highest level of academic achievement, as well as proficiency in multiple languages, as well as English. And in order to do that, to set the expectations for districts and schools, we created a blueprint for multilingual learner success, which is a statewide framework aimed to clarify those expectations for administrators and policymakers and practitioners. That framework is essentially composed of 8 principles intended to provide guidance and support, as well as to promote a better understanding and appreciation for bilingual education, as well as English new language and world languages in New York State. A very important and key principle under this framework is Principle 1, which is that all teachers are teachers of multilingual learners and need to plan accordingly. Under this premise, we believe that all teachers are expected to understand the needs of the student's population and are expected to work together to integrate language and content instruction in order to support language development and academic achievement. While all of these principles that you see here are very important, we believe that Principle 1 really reinforces the importance of all teachers being willing and able to address the academic and linguistic needs of all of our students that are multilingual learners. And so I think that one of the important aspects of this work came after the release of the blueprint. The New York State Board of Regents adopted Commissioner's Regulation Part 154. And so Part 154 establishes the legal requirements for the education of multilingual learners in New York State. And the purpose of the regulations are really to ensure that our students are receiving equitable services in order to achieve the same educational goals and standards that have been established by the Board of Regents for all students. In the interest of time, I just listed all of the 16 areas related to the provision of instructional services for multilingual learners, and we will focus this presentation on the units of study. And so the units of study basically establish the minimum instructional requirements for multilingual learners at each of the English proficiency levels, right? And they are entering, emerging, transitioning, expanding, and commanding. Here we have the mandated units for ELS, and so as you can see in this table, students that are at the entering level are entitled to receive 360 mandated minutes per week for grades K through 8, and 540 minutes per week for grades 9 to 12. Emerging students receive 360 minutes per week. Students at the commanding level have met the linguistic demands necessary to demonstrate English language proficiency through measures by the NYSES law, which is the New York State English as a Second Language Achievement Test. And those former ELs are entitled to receive 2 additional years of support that can include ENL instruction as well. This is very important to us, and so in order for these regulations to be really laid out in a way that could be provided as guidance, we created these units of study tables serve as support for those districts, right, to understand what are those mandated services for our students in New York. And as I mentioned before, they established the minimum requirement for students to receive those services. So now let's take a look at the units, more specifically, English as a New Language instruction. ENL in New York can be provided via 2 models. Standalone, provided by an ESOL-certified teacher in order to develop the English language needed for academic success. Integrated ENL, which can be provided by 2 teachers, the ENL teacher alongside a content area teacher, or individually taught by a dually certified teacher. What is important is, and as it was referenced before, that now through this integrated model, our students are able to receive elective credit. And so our students receive in New York an elective credit after passing each corresponding standalone ENL unit of study. And with the integrated model, the students receive a core content area credit after passing each corresponding ENL unit of study in a content area. As you can see, all of the students are at all levels must receive integrated ENL in order to provide them with that rich and more rigorous opportunities in learning grade level content while providing them with the English language skills needed to access that content. For us, it's really important to know that schools also have the flexibility to provide additional standalone ENL or integrated, because we know that the needs of our students, it is critical to provide differentiated instruction that can meet those needs. And furthermore, districts and schools can go beyond, right, of those minimum requirements to provide instruction that is targeted to the needs of the students that they serve. And so in New York, why integrated ENL? Right? We can no longer afford, really, to have our students to receive a narrow focused education in which grammar and vocabulary and no content is being taught, right? New York State adopted integrated ENL in order to ensure our students are receiving equitable services to grade level instruction with the linguistic supports. In New York, as we mentioned before, students now are able to attain credits for ENL, which they could not earn in the past. And so, as I mentioned as well, the expectation in New York is, in our blueprint, is that all teachers are teachers of multilingual learners, and they need to plan accordingly to co-design, co-deliver instruction that is culturally and linguistically appropriate for all diverse learners, including those with an individualized education program. It was really critical for us to also align the policy and the instructional practices to current research so that all students' educational and social-emotional needs were met in multiple languages. We certainly agree with CCSSO when they said in 2012, and it's relevant today actually, that engagement in content areas cannot wait until students are ready to exit from EL status. And it's simple for two reasons, right? First, the standards explicitly include ELs, and second, the English language assessments are designed to correspond to the content areas and the standards. And although, we know that much work needs to be done, we are very excited about the progress our students are making. As you can see, the percentage of ELs in this slide of achieving commanding on the NACSS has increased across all grade levels from 9.4 in 2015-16 to 12% in 2016-17. In addition, we are very excited because our multilingual learners exit EL status, they become former ELs, right? And we see that our former ELs are outperforming our non-EL students in the ELA. For example, 45.2% of our former ELs are achieving ELA proficiency versus 42.6% of our non-ELs. And we really are starting to see the impact of the co-teaching model. For example, we have a district that took a look at the number of students that receive instruction in 3 different models. They looked at co-teaching, they looked at instruction with a teacher, dually certified teacher, and they also looked at instruction being provided by an ELA certified teacher. Through that analysis, they found that students receiving instruction in the co-teaching model are earning more credits towards graduation compared to those students receiving instruction only with a content area certification. Integrated ENL is essential and also leverages and increases teachers' knowledge and expertise for both ENL and the content area teachers. In terms of challenges, as you all know, we have over a number of districts and over 2 million students and over 8.8% of students who are ELs. And New York State is a large district, right? Providing continuous, sustainable, and focused professional development to build that capacity among both ESOL teachers and content area teachers, as well as administrators, continues to be really an area of need. And in addition, providing common time for teachers to plan, to coordinate delivery of instruction, as well as to co-assess students' work is essential for this model to work. And so scheduling common time is also a challenge for the schools. And lastly, I think the effective and trusting partnerships between the ESOL and the content area teachers is critical. If we want instruction to be fully focused on those students, these trusting relationships require time to develop, and we continue to work with districts to find best practices to address these challenges and build capacity around this area. Here are some of the supports that we have provided our districts. We have created the UNESCO study tables that you look at a sample before to provide guidance around ENL and staffing requirements. We also created additional resource guides and webinars on co-teaching educators. Provided professional development opportunities for teams of ESOL and content area teachers as well as administrators across New York on integrated ENL. And furthermore, one important piece of the work is also we fund teacher institutes with institutions of higher ed across the state to implement new teacher education programs and cover the cost for those teachers of obtaining ESOL certification and bilingual education extensions required for the appropriate implementation of Part 154. It is obvious that this work continues to evolve, and we are learning more about what is needed to support our teachers and administrators as they continue to implement successful integrated models. Most recently, we are convening focus groups with teachers and administrators to learn more about best practices and resources needed. We are truly committed in New York to support our districts and schools in order to ensure that our multilingual learners attain the high level of academic success and language proficiency in both the home language and English. Thank you, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you, Lizette. What a great pairing to have you and Silvia, to have this sort of, close to the ground, district level, and then just to really take in all of these different efforts that have been made in New York State. So lots of questions. Thanks everybody for sending in so many already. But feel free to keep them coming, because if we don't get to any of them, we'll be able to reply over email after the webinar. But just to dive in now, Julie, I think I'll go to you first with two kind of clarifying or specific model type questions. So the first one was, could you define developmental bilingual ed? That was just a question about just how exactly are we using it. But then also there's a question from someone working in Texas, where there are many dual language programs that use the Gomez and Gomez model, and so the question is, could you explain what the model entails and how it may differ from other dual language models?
Absolutely, yeah, great questions. Let me take the developmental bilingual one first. Within, when I was at the Center for Applied Linguistics, we considered dual language to be an umbrella term for the different populations that might be included. So developmental bilingual or maintenance bilingual are two names that are used for the kind of program that only enrolls students who are English learners who are speakers of the partner language. So there's no native English speakers there. Developmental has nothing to do with developmental disabilities or anything like that. It just happens to be the same word. And then the other two are the foreign language immersion, and then the one where you have the two sets of kids together, which is two-way immersion, which is the one I spent the most time with. And I'm really glad that someone asked about the Gomez and Gomez model, because that is, I should preface by saying I haven't talked to anybody working in one of those programs for a while, so things may have changed. But according to what I had talked about with folks there, in those programs, instead of keeping the English speakers and the Spanish speakers together so they can learn from each other all day, and doing the instruction in, teaching some subjects in some languages and some subjects in other languages, the two aspects of that program that I think are a little bit problematic are that they separate the kids for instruction. So English students are taught to read in English, and Spanish speakers are taught to read in Spanish. And we know from decades of foreign language immersion that English speakers can learn to read in another language because it's in the U.S. and they have the context of being able to keep their first language, and that language is a high-status language. So the problem is, if you don't provide a lot of the foreign language to both English speakers and speakers of that language early on, kids tend to not know enough of it when they get older. So what I've seen happen in those models where they separate kids is by the time they get to fourth grade, the English speakers, they're trying to put the kids back together again, and the English speakers don't know enough Spanish to participate, and they start complaining about why are we doing this, and everything just sort of falls apart. So there may be programs that are doing it well. I'm not aware of, exactly what's going on with those models. I could talk about this particular topic for hours and hours, so if anyone's interested, please email me, and you'll make me a very happy girl, and I'll send you some information.
Okay. So, Sylvia, I think I'll send these questions to you, but Lizette, afterwards, if you want to comment, I think they might be relevant to both of you. So, Sylvia, there's one of the questions is, what does bilingual support look like for students who don't speak Spanish or Hmong in your district? I know that, NPI has been publishing, and we know this is a reality in a lot of places, where there are super diverse settings where there's no one majority language in the school, and so the question is partly, what does support look like in that context when there's many different languages without one being dominant in a classroom? And then separately, there's a language just about there's a question about low incidence. If you're in a school with a low incidence school, what are some of the strategies that are being suggested for teachers who are trying to incorporate home language into those settings, even though there may not be teachers who speak that language.
Yes, yes. So that is a challenge for us as we enroll all students in the school of their attendance area. It means that we don't have critical density in any one site. Still, we're able to identify the top languages. So we do have 109 plus different home languages, and of those, the top 12 languages, we have hired bilingual resource specialists, we call, who are interpreters and translators, and we place them strategically, of course, at the schools that have the highest enrollment to spend their time there in multiple sites, providing that home language support to students to the greatest extent and also for families. So that's something that I monitor every year, and as languages increase in enrollment, then we hire people to provide that service. But part of the ELL plan, part of the improvement is then when we aren't able to do that, we need to ensure that both the supplemental support teachers and the classroom teachers, between the two of them, they really are implementing second language acquisition strategies throughout the day to facilitate the development of second language acquisition within that environment. So that's why we have enacted some improvements, making sure that we provide support for teachers who want to go back and get their ESL licenses, because we acknowledge that that has to be sort of a first level of support for all students, regardless of home language. And to the extent that the enrollment increases, we hire staff to make sure that students have support in the first language.
This is
Lisette. Go ahead, Lisette. Yeah.
Sure. In New York, we have bilingual programs in over 15 languages. One important aspect of our English as a New Language programs is that teachers are required to support the students in the home language, and so they are very creative in ensuring that resources and materials are available in the home language, even if that teacher doesn't speak that language. For us, it's important that students are able to produce what they know in the home language, although the teacher might not be able to speak it. And so it is required for our teachers to be able to support what the children bring.
Great. So, Lisette, there's a question that asking about, Wisconsin and some other states are WIDA states. They're all sort of aligned with a broader curriculum, or maybe it's right to say set of standards in terms of English language development. But so could you just say, since New York isn't one of those states, the question is there a curriculum or standards that is associated with New York State's English language test, and how do teachers, how is that integrated, I guess, into the both the English learner teaching, the multilingual learner teaching, but then also the mainstream teaching?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so Wisconsin is one of the founding states of WIDA, and WIDA's main site is right here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So we're very glad to be working with them very closely. And it is a set of standards. It's not a curriculum per se, and we strive to provide professional development to all teachers, specifically or with greater intensity, of course, to teachers that may be teaching some of our shelter courses, but in general, all teachers, to make sure that they understand how to integrate both content and language standards into their teaching. And that has been the case for the last, 15 years that I've been in this position, to make sure that all of our teachers know of the standards, know how to plan, and then know how to co-plan with their colleagues, and how to deliver that instruction. And then, of course, the assessment is also not just of the content, but of the language development.
Great, thanks, Silvia.
Yeah, that's the way.
Lisette, what does that look like in New York State, since you're not part of that? New York has its own system, presumably?
Sure. So you're right. New York State is not part of the WIDA, but what we have is the bilingual progressions, which is a framework that is in alignment with the standards in ELA and math. And basically, they describe the linguistic demands that the students need, and they are definitely in alignment with the standards that all students are able to meet for the content.
Great, thank you. And then Lisette, maybe I'll throw this one to you also. Could you say a little bit about how, with New York City and New York State expanding pre-K instruction, to what extent has pre-K been included in the overall model for English language development at the state level?
Thank you. That's a great question, because we're really excited about the work that we're doing in that area. Just recently this year, we actually created what we call an emergent multilingual learner protocol that pre-K programs are encouraged to use, which is basically a protocol that would allow those schools to identify those young learners and identify the home language that they speak. And the purpose of that is to be able to have the information at the hands of those teachers to be able to support that home language. Obviously, this is it's a high priority for the department. We also have an early childhood work group led by the border regions, which is actually seeking the opportunity to be able to identify those children, and so that we will have more bilingual opportunities and programs in those early childhood settings.
Great, thank you. So Julie, there's one clarification question and one sort of a I don't know, it's partly opinion, partly evidence question. So the clarification one is in dual language immersion programs. Maybe this is more about Wisconsin, sorry. Do students learn the same concepts in both languages each day? For example, the 3 branches of U.S. government, the parts of animal cells, do they learn that in both languages, or is it different content across the day usually? And then there's also a question about newcomer schools or programs, schools being just sort of separate actual schools for newcomer students or a program within a school. So there is some debate, the questioner notes, about which might be better for students, and is there any evidence, on like which is better, having it as a separate school or as a program within a school, with the idea that if you're in a separate school, you might be able to offer more in-depth services, but then there's also the worry about that segregating those students could inhibit their integration.
Right, great, excellent questions. The one about teaching concepts in both languages, it depends on the model. Some schools teach all content areas in both languages, so they might have social studies in English for a week and then social studies in Spanish for a week and go back and forth like that. Some teach one content area in one language only. There's various beliefs about, what works better, and that's the kind of thing that schools discuss, as they're building their program. But I do think that a lot of programs are thinking about how, if we're not teaching explicitly, like you say, the 3 branches of government, if we're not teaching that explicitly in both languages, how can we maybe teach it explicitly in English, and then in Spanish maybe we can read a book that brings it up, and we won't take time to re-explain it, because once a person knows a concept, they know the concept. But, how can we find a moment to introduce some of the words, or say like, oh, look at the word words for legislative are the same in 2 languages. Isn't that interesting? So bridging the languages is definitely something we're learning much more about. There's an excellent book on that by Cheryl Euro and Karen Beeman. I can send you the link to that if folks are interested. I highly recommend it. The other question about having students in individual schools versus integrated is an excellent question, and this is another topic I could talk about for hours. But really the idea there is you have to think about what can this district do. If the district really doesn't have a huge capacity and doesn't have literacy specialists that can go, so you can have 1 or 2 in every high school, maybe there's only a couple of folks who are really well trained in teaching literacy to adolescents. So having all of the adolescents that need that together in one place really makes a lot of sense. So it's really just sort of a matter, it's really more of a practical matter than a pedagogical matter, because you want to make sure that students are getting the services they need. A great option is to do a newcomer school that's inside of another school so that kids can be with other kids, or to do newcomer strands in several schools, like San Francisco does it, so that students will stay in those, like you start off in a newcomer program that's within a school, and then you stay in that building all 4 years, or the Internationals models where students go into that as newcomers, but they can stay there even after they've transitioned out of EL status. So, you know, there's a variety of different ways to do this. It has, you also asked about, you know, are they legal given that they're separate education? I don't know that that's been challenged, and I really hope it's not. I do think that in a lot of, I mean, unless they are really providing an inferior education, which, by the way, can happen if students are integrated into general comprehensive high schools too. But you know, I think that these newcomer academies fill a real need and are a way of using resources in a way that makes sense for districts. So I think that they definitely are an option that districts should take advantage of if they can.
Great, thanks, Julie. So Sylvia, there's a question for you about parent engagement. What specifically have you found effective, and are you doing in terms of trying to engage parents in ways that will help them support their children's success? And then I thought I also would send you the question that asks about models for working with refugee students. Do you find that any of the instructional models are better suited to refugee students, or are there other models?
Yes, so in terms of parent engagement, what's exciting about the work in MMSD is that the district as a whole has made parent engagement a priority. So there is a department that works in collaboration with our department and other departments to make sure that the work that's being done to communicate better with parents is inclusive also of the needs of English language learners, the parents of English language learners. So, so in addition to that work, we have also promoted a couple of different models. One of them I want to mention is the MALDEF curriculum, where we have been able to work with different parents to develop leadership, not just parents knowing, being informed or being in the loop sort of thing. No, it's also about parent leadership. And we found that curriculum to be very effective in that regard. And we also promote, support each school in having specific meetings and engagement activities for English language learners of their schools. And then at the district level, I have a group that I call our ELL Parent Advisory Work Group, and these are all parents from different schools, where we run certain materials by them to say, what do you think? What are what are ways that we haven't thought of that you think might be more effective in working with parents? So that's one area. And then in terms of the question around the needs of refugee students, what we do is we take the staffing that we have, we provide in general to schools, and we try to target it with greater intensity for families that are in our district that, are refugee families. We also collaborate with we call it our county agency that works with refugee families. So we are part of this very interdisciplinary team of people that get together, and we share information, which is the part that is very important. Make sure that the flow of information across agencies and that the district, the local district, is part of those conversations. And then we share that with our schools. We also have a staff member that if there are any emergencies that we learned in terms of something that's happening at the school and that families need, we're able to connect them directly with these agencies across our county to make sure that they have all of their needs met beyond the educational needs.
Great. Thank you.
I wanted to share some of the work that we're doing around for parent engagement and providing parents with information. I mean, obviously, we believe in strong instructional practices, and so in order to do that, we have made it very clear that we need to support parents. And one of the first things we did is to create a Parent Bill of Rights that is translated in over 20 languages. As well as every resource that is parent-faced materials is also translated. But in addition to that, we have created videos that explain to the parents what are those programs available for their children in New York, because we want to make sure that the information that they receive is uniform and that they receive the same message from us about what are their rights and how they can support their children. And districts and schools are required to ensure that that information is provided to the parents every year in multiple occasions.
Thanks, Lizette. I also wanted to collapse a few questions together for you. There have been a few questions about materials, for folks who are looking for resources in languages other than Spanish and English, but also some questions about how do you get school administrators or policymakers to recognize that this is an area that needs that actually needs really active management and support. And so I guess, Lizette, one of the things I'd want to ask you is, can you say a little bit more about where the Part 154 regulation kind of came from, and is there a lot of satisfaction with it or pushback on it? Is it considered a success or not? Because it seems like it's a very, I don't know, not aggressive, but like a, extremely detailed state policy. And I just wonder, seeing that there's a lot of supports associated with it, do you not get as much pushback on it? But just what's the overall sense of how well that's been accepted by districts and actually being implemented, because it is an interesting kind of approach in trying to solve a bunch of your district problems at once, by trying to implement something that's much more extensive and specific at the state level.
Sure. So obviously superintendents need support, right? And I think any pushback, as you put it, that we received was because maybe they had a lack of understanding of how to do this work. And so that's why for us was critical to ensure that the blueprint set the expectations for those superintendents and for all districts and schools. And so after that, the regulations were natural to follow, right? The reinforcement that guarantees the students' rights to these services. But for us, what we do is to ensure that they have that professional development that is targeted to their particular needs. And so we have had 3 years of engagement with different administrators and principals and superintendents to ensure that we are actually providing that ongoing support. And so that engagement, after we passed Part 154, was crucial for us. We also have regional bilingual technical assistance centers. And I have to tell you, superintendents and administrators were part of the process of creating PA 154. They constructed these regulations alongside with us, and not just administrators, but also teachers. We did not do this overnight. It was a 3-year process that developed in regulations that truly make sense for the populations that we serve in New York.
Great. Well, so I know that we've already run over a bit, and we have a lot of questions we haven't gotten to. So I think what we'll do is just promise all of you who've had questions that weren't answered, we'll divide them up among the different speakers and just make sure that all of them are answered for you. But otherwise, I think we are going to close, and I just want to say thank you so much to Lizette and to Silvia for their terrific remarks. Julie, congratulations on the brief, and all of you, we wish you great success in your work and are eager to stay in touch with you. And as I said, we'll make sure we'll get back to you with for any of the unanswered questions. So you can look for everything we talked about today online. And again, thanks especially to Silvia and Lizette for all of their great work and for sharing so much of it with us today. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.